partner and align with your SDR leaders, with your sales leaders, and with your marketing leaders. Get agreement across the team on what your SLAs should be, because you're going to have to enforce it as a collective team.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Revenue Growth Architects podcast. It's Chrissy here from CS2, and I have my fellow hosts, Xander and Charlie, also from CS2, as you all know. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting topic, something that we haven't visited in a while, but we're going to be talking about how to improve your funnel velocity with SLAs, and really about all the SLAs that you can obtain to or hold your team to. A lot of the times we've noticed that when we start working with clients that they will typically follow one of those SLAs. So we're going to talk about all the SLAs that we think you should be tracking. So especially as it pertains to our handoffs to sales and when things are with sales in an active life cycle. So first, I just want to lay the groundwork for the different SLAs that we're going to be talking about. So the first one is the one that everyone mostly tracks, and that's kind of like what you call your speed to lead. And that's how long it takes to follow up with a sales ready lead or an MQL. And that's like that first touch when you move them into like a contacting or working status. And typically, depending on the source of the lead, that's a short time period. It can be for demo requests like 10 minutes. And then for all your sales ready leads, it could be 24 hours. But that's where people usually track. But there's also other SLAs. So another one being how long things are left in sales accepted or working, like how long it's been since they had a last touch and how many number of touches each working lead should have. And then meetings, how long you're letting those meetings sit before getting converted to an opportunity. And then for an opportunity pipeline, track around length and being in those stages and how long an opportunity can actually stay open before it's closed out or closed won. And really, we want to track also historical attainment, not people who haven't, met a certain SLA, but also how long it took to get to that stage attainment, because that'll give you a sense for, is there improvements you can do on the length of time or speed to meet that SLA or not have met that SLA. So that is kind of the SLAs I want to go through. We'll talk about a little bit of the nuances and other things to track. But I just want to kick it off then, start the conversation. Charlie, are companies even doing a good job of enforcing SLAs or tracking SLAs?
No. Can that be my answer? That's the short answer. And I think the more nuanced answer is probably not, and mainly for a few reasons. So 3 reasons. So really, first off, a lot of companies don't even have SLAs. And they haven't got them agreed. They may conceptually know that they need to be kind of making sure reps are following up and making sure they're doing these activities, but they haven't sat down and agreed upon, this is the follow-up time that we're expecting, and we're going to set as a service level agreement that we want to have for sales to follow up on our demo request. This is the follow-up time, or this is how we want sales to be able to work the working leads to get them to a meeting, and this is the time frame. They haven't gone through that exercise to build out all of the different SLAs across the team. So that's kind of the first miss. But then some companies might have that, but then they're just not tracking. So, what gets measured gets managed. If you're not actually measuring your SLAs, then it doesn't matter if you're telling your sales rep you need to do this. You can't actually tell if they're doing it or not. And then the last thing is, maybe some of them are tracking it, but are you actually using that data? Has that data been operationalized throughout your team? Are you looking at that data? Are you escalating when SLAs are not met? Are you actually kind of holding people accountable? And I would say a vast majority of companies fail at one of those hurdles. They might get over the first, second, they might get over the second, third, the third. There's not a ton that end up getting through all of those hurdles to the end where they really got a good job of SLA management.
Yeah, I have a second part to that too. Maybe Xander, if you have any thoughts, but I think one thing to add on is I think companies are probably also not holding people accountable. They're not having those honest conversations of who's actually not attaining those SLAs. What do you think, Xander? Do you think that some people are just not even holding people accountable because they don't have the data? But also, if they have the data, are they even holding people accountable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've been talking about some organizations don't want to put people on blast by throwing this up on a dashboard and sharing it with their colleagues. But sometimes it's what you need, right? Is, it's the good and the bad, right? SLAs are one part of your performance as a SDR or a salesperson, and understanding, how fast are you getting to your sales ready leads? How fast are you getting them from sales accepted into the next stage? It's really important to be able to see that. But we don't want to create a toxic environment. We don't want to create a hyper competitive environment where people are cutting each other down. So how do you find that balance of accountability and transparency without it becoming a weapon to be used across the team and creating a poor culture?
Yeah. I think it's sales to me, well, revenue teams in general kind of act almost similar to a sport, and it's a team. But I think that somewhere along the line too, when we've had goals and tracking, I think have moved away from getting visibility into that, especially as we've worked more remote recently. I feel like when companies were in one place, there was a lot more visibility. I remember even past roles we've had, some of our dashboards show up on a big screen that would be in the lunchroom or near the sales team. And it was almost like stats that people were tracking. And I think somewhere along the way, it's kind of moved away from that, mainly because there's not a central place to look at when there really should be. You could have things in Slack. You can have things, show up on a homepage in Salesforce on a dashboard or so forth. But I think that has gotten a little bit lost. And I think that if we just think of them as stats, and if we just think of them as kind of performance measurements, we need to take a little bit of that, the personal kind of fear around that. It's really just black and white when it comes to that kind of things in business, and not be too afraid to hold people accountable to the job that you want them to do, in my opinion.
I think having a competitive, an element of competition in the culture isn't a bad thing, and you shouldn't be shying away from it. It drives people's behavior, hopefully in the right direction. And as long as you're trying to create a culture of excellence, as opposed to kind of a culture where you're scapegoating or you're blaming people for kind of maybe the company missed its number. So you're this person was the reason because of that, because they didn't meet SLAs or something like that. As long as you're using it as a way to drive healthy competition, you're able to kind of show what good looks like. If there's no way to compare, then the people who are underperforming don't have a model to be able to try and understand what they should do to start performing. So you need to be able to have that, and especially in sales, where particularly people who get into sales probably do have a healthy dose of competitive spirit in them anyway. So I think trying to harness that to drive the right behavior, because obviously what we're talking about here is pipeline velocity, pipeline conversions, creating an efficient revenue engine that is really operating at a high standard. You're not able to do that if you're not able to measure and then hold people to that high standard. And you're going to have to show them the numbers, and you're going to have to compare people against each other to be able to do that. Otherwise, that accountability gets lost, I think.
Totally. I was just talking to a client about that. And I think sometimes it could be a culture thing. So maybe having to kind of push through and say hey, maybe we need to reintroduce this. Okay. I want to dive into some of the SLAs. Maybe Xander, you can kick us off. But the first one, I said, a lot of companies track this, but around first touch on your sales ready leads or your MQLs per se. But what are some things that listeners should think about when tracking it the right way?
Yeah, so this is kind of your sales ready first touch mechanism, right? And there's so many different ways to be able to do it now. You have automated sequences that can kick off in a sales engagement platform. And sometimes people will say, that's my SLA. And it's always going to be within 10 minutes because it's completely automated. And if that's the case, great. But you're also sending out a completely automated message that is probably no better than an automated message coming out of your marketing automation platform. So, it's important to think about, is that first touch, that's your chance to really land with somebody. Don't make it something that's completely boilerplate. And so if you choose to say that the first touch is a semi-automated step, it's still really critical and important that you're measuring how long did it take somebody out to send out like a personalized message that means something. You can choose. It can be, hey, thanks so much for messaging us. I'm working on schedules to get together. But then like, what is that next touch? What's that real personalized touch that you want to be able to measure? And where it gets to be hard from like a technical perspective, and I think that we've all felt this, is like working hours, right? Well, what happens if the demo request comes in on a Friday and I have a process that says in 24 hours, my manager's going to get a message. In 72 hours, my manager's manager and the CEO is coming in on a Monday and getting a message saying that they didn't follow up because it came on a Friday. So it's really important that you kind of devise your SLAs to be able to align to that. Oftentimes, one of the ways that we really like to set it up is, especially if you have like a platform like Lean Data where you have working hours and you can actually set it up within those working hours. And you can truly say business hours, this is your 24, 12-hour SLA from when you're working, can go a long way.
Yeah, totally. There's some interesting things you can do in different places too. If people aren't as comfortable within Salesforce, like in your marketing automation platforms, if you want to start tracking the time at a certain time, there's some things you can do around wait until steps or wait steps and only have those firing on business days and stuff. So it's a good time to get crafty around what you can do. I think to your point around, I love your idea of like, hey, it could be checking the box for this if you're putting them into automated sequence, but is that really even an SLA then you should enforce on someone? But I agree with you, like maybe helping out that step, like maybe automatically putting them into a sequence, but the first step is not an automated step, I think is a middle ground that we've kind of worked with clients before. And it decreases that pain for SDRs to try and like pick up a lead within CRM or contact, put that into the right sequence, especially for certain sources that you want a quick follow-up, like demo request, contact sales, free trials, all that. So I think that is definitely good. I think one thing too here is it can really uncover some systematic bottlenecks. So if you're seeing that some MQLs are like not making it to sales in the right time, it could mean your order of operations might need some revisiting. It can mean that you might be getting sync errors and those are resolving later. There's a lot of things actually that if you're going to prep and try and enforce an SLA for sales, it even then puts the SLA back onto marketing to say, hey, well, you need to also work and to make sure we can get those right away. And I think also that uncovers like maybe you do some type of things where, you're instantly connecting someone with sales even on the website or in a meeting. So I think it creates some really good conversations on how to improve the buyer journey. And not just all of that being on the sales rep, but really on marketing to think how they can contribute to.
I think that's a really good point. I think all of the SLAs are kind of shared, even if it does somewhat fall on the sales team. But if you think about the sales ready, or someone comes in, demo request, and sales has the follow-up time SLA, that's a really good example there where, maybe marketing does help set up, instant meeting booking, etc., to help them meet that SLA. You still want the SLA because not everyone's going to book a meeting at that point. And there might be other, hand raiser activities that need a step between when that meeting's being booked. So, I don't think that kind of eradicates the need for the SLA, but it makes it more of a shared goal between marketing and sales. And like you said, if there's a lot of systematic kind of integration issues or process issues leading up to the handoff, then sales is going to call you out on that and say, okay, we've got a 2-hour SLA. I didn't get this record until 1 hour, 59 minutes. Like, what the hell? Like, you need to help me out here, marketing. Like, what happened there? I need to get this 5 minutes after they fill out the form so I can actually meet my SLA. So again, driving the right behavior, getting everyone aligned to kind of the fundamental business process that you're trying to, build out, because if we go through in this kind of organized and high velocity method, it's going to lead to better results.
Okay. The next one, I have a lot of opinions on. I think there's a lot of conversation around this one because it's not really well tracked. It's not even looked at. But really, when we think about our traditional sales accepted leads or, the leads in a working or contacting stage, putting the SLA around that. Like, what do you think about that, Charlie? And what do you think are something why you actually should be tracking an SLA around how long people stay in that stage?
Probably because loads of prospects just end up in that stage forever. So if you don't try and enforce something, then you're just going to have, thousands and thousands of people in working that aren't being worked. And, that you have a lot of kind of surrounding, maybe automation or programs or campaigns that are kind of reliant on that stage. Like sometimes some companies might restrict some elements of marketing. I don't always believe in this, but they might restrict some elements of marketing while sales is working them. I think my personal opinion on that is that it should be shared all the way through the funnel, all the way to closed won. Maybe what you're sending is different, or maybe the ways that you're engaging is different throughout all of the buying stages, but you should never turn off marketing. But some companies do, or some companies are reliant on, that status. So that means it could have a double effect where sales is just not trying to engage with that person and marketing is on pause for that person. They're just going to get stale and, nothing's going to happen with them. And it just causes havoc with your conversion rates. It causes havoc with your velocity data when you're not like closing or progressing properly. And you're just like leaving them there, even though technically they're closed because you haven't spoken to them for 6 months and they were still stuck in working. But like, you're just not actually closing them. When eventually, when you do close them, now it looks like every skews your averages, massively because all these people got closed with like a massive, long time frame. It's just like bad practice. And it's just something that every single company out there, I'm sure everyone in ops can relate to. Go run a report, look at, how many leads and contacts are in a working status. And if you don't have SLAs, there's going to be a lot in there. So it's a really good place. And there's other ways you can get around it. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit more, but around how like maybe there's like an automated close based on, lack of sales touch points or lack of any touch points and how long they've been in that stage. So I think that's a good way to try and get out of this. But having the SLA that both marketing and sales agree on how long we should be working them before closing them is super important.
Yeah. But like, Xander, do you have any opinions on kind of how long someone should be in working stage or a way to track when an actual working lead has gone stale? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that the best way to be able to approach this is based upon the last activity. So if you're tracking, like, when's the last time that you actually reached out or they reached out back to you? And then you can kind of find that time frame. I feel like 30 to 45 days, depending on your sales cycle, probably makes the most sense. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to say, well, you have 30 days after they become sales accepted to progress them into a meeting, if that's your process, right? And 30 days goes by, you're actively engaging with this person, and then all of a sudden your marketing automation tool just closes it out. Person gets lost in the ether of all of your recycled people. So basing it on like that last activity and really fine tuning how that's working. Oftentimes you're finding, Marketo is creating activities or HubSpot's creating activities. And so it looks like they're engaged, but they're really just getting sent out your monthly newsletter. So really just like making sure that the activity truly means that it's a sales activity goes really far in being able to identify like these are the people that are actively being worked versus not. You can also base that on your sequences. If you have a sequence where you know that there's going to be 12 touch points and in those 12 touch points, nothing happens, probably a good idea. Close out the funnel, move it back to the marketing team and let them re-engage.
Totally. Yeah. I think that you bring up a good point because I think if you're trying to think about, okay, what is a good kind of SLA time frame? I think definitely when something becomes stale, if there haven't been any activity, within 30 to 45 days, I think that's a really good kind of yardstick to hold. So if you do have a tool like Outreach or SalesLoft, you can actually look at and see like, okay, how long and how many touches, at what phase, like do those become, not really useful and where are you getting the most connects? And a lot of those tools have a lot of that great data. It's just no one's really actually kind of actively looking at it a lot of the time. Your SDR manager might be maybe having that conversation, but I think it's really fruitful. Xander, you mentioned when we chat about this, but like also looking at number of touches, because I think one thing is like, yes, you don't want people to be stuck in this stage, but also you want people to get like the due diligence that they need. So this doesn't really need like an SLA tied to it, but one thing for measurement, I think, is making sure that there are enough touches made, especially on the right leads. Yes, if someone's like not a good fit, get sent back to marketing, that makes sense. But is there only like one call, one email, and then they're like, I'm going to move on to the next lead? It brings up a lot of conversations. Like if you have a ton of people stuck in that working status, maybe you're sending over too many MQLs and they just don't have enough time to do the due diligence. And so it can, bring up, okay, again, like what can marketing do to help improve that? And if you're doing a ton of outbound, this is another thing, but like, do you even move those into a working stage if you're just like kind of doing these big sprints on a lot of people? Because technically, like, you're going to have to close those out at some point. So maybe it's just when you get connected and you can maybe adjust your sales engagement tools to only start tracking as working when you do get connected. Just some things to think about. Like marketing can work with sales to really decide what's the best way to track this and what are some measures in place to make sure that it's easy to keep things clean and, disposition them. Okay, next one is meetings and tracking those. And I think this is another one that can get lost in the ether or have a lot of activity around. But what do you think, Charlie? Do you think that there should be a specific SLA around meetings and moving those into an opportunity?
I think that especially once a meeting has completed, it has been completed and you've done the qualification during that meeting, you've had that discussion. So you should be on your way or already know if there is opportunity there. And depending on kind of how you create opportunities and when you create opportunities, you might already have a stage 0 opportunity when the meeting is scheduled. So, but either way, you need to give the feedback to everyone, including yourself, on is this progressing to the next stage or not. So if it's stage 0 opportunity and now at the meeting stage, then now your goal is to like move it into one of the next stages. Stage 1 or stage 2, depending on what your definitions are for opportunity stages. And that is purely, based on the findings from that meeting. Or you close that opportunity. If you don't have an opportunity, then either way, you still have to update, the contact or whatever mechanism within the meeting, the activity in Salesforce to essentially give the feedback to say this is not progressing or this is progressing. And you should do that right after the meeting. I mean, you shouldn't wait, right? Unless you really need another meeting. So if you need another meeting, then we get another meeting scheduled before you can maybe move them on. That's fine. So I think having an SLA that kind of can handle the scenarios that you're seeing. So, but most often I would say you want to have an SLA that's going to be pretty tight after meeting is completed. And then, if they need to have another meeting, then they can break that SLA. But you want to be holding them accountable to trying to have a really productive meeting at that time to then progress them. So it should be based off when the meeting is complete and then have a pretty quick time period from moving to meeting complete to the next stage or closed out.
Yeah, we've done some automation that I think is really useful, but like, especially if an SDR is creating the meeting for the sales rep, that since you're already tracking on the activity of the meeting, like when that was meant to take place, having it directly after that time period to send an alert with a link to that activity to actually say, like, was this meeting completed? And then also to convert it to an opportunity if it is one. And I feel like that created a good kind of process handoff between SDRs and sales. But Xander, what do you think are some things that marketing should think about, or marketing and sales together should partner on if they're seeing that there's just a ton of meetings getting created or set, but none of them kind of moving down to an opportunity?
This is the area that gets to be really, really complex for each organization. This is where we probably see the most variation. And that is, what's your entrance criteria to be considered pipeline? Where I find a lot of the people that get stuck in meeting booked is because, you have an organization that's looking for a budget. They're looking for a timeline. They need the full band criteria in order to be able to move it into the pipeline. It usually does not take place after a single meeting that the SDR has booked for an AE. So really trying to figure out, like, what are you trying to measure? You're trying to measure the velocity of, I had a meeting and I either know it's a complete bust and it's not going to happen, or there's a chance that it's going to happen. And so setting your entrance criteria and partnering with your rev ops and sales ops teams to set the criteria where it's attainable to get them into the next stage. So maybe you're moving it from a meeting that exists on a leader or contact, and then it moves into a 0% opportunity where you can have longer SLAs. That's one way. Or you have a 0% opportunity, and then you say your 5% opportunities, while they are pipeline, that next stage is still not full band. And then you set your next stage as that full band. So you got to give yourself the opportunity to measure how effective was the meeting, and then how long did it take us to build the business case with the prospect and really get it moving into the next stages. If you're only working request to demos and contact sales, maybe that velocity is going to just inherently move really fast, but we don't see that with the majority of outbound or, scored up warm leads that are coming from marketing activities. It takes longer, and that's okay. That's to be expected as long as you enforce your SLAs and expect your velocity to move a certain direction.
Totally. I think also the criteria for what's a good meeting, having that up front too before scheduling the meeting. I think that can uncover that bottleneck per se, but maybe to really work with the SDRs for getting a better sense of who is a good meeting. And then that could also be down to how they're measured. If your SDR teams are just measured on meetings booked and not anything like meetings accepted, you're probably going to find a ton of kind of junk there. So it's kind of the whatever gets measured gets managed again conversation.
Yeah, and it's a good point you brought up, Xander. I think a company shouldn't get hung up on a meeting once finished. The first meeting, the next stage always has to be like a pipeline in forecast stage, I mean, that could happen after a meeting. You might have a meeting and they're just like, we're evaluating this, this category right now. We have budget, blah, blah, blah. And I'm the right person to speak to. So, but often maybe you're not quite there yet. You still need to know whether you are moving forward to going towards that or not. And I think you can generally figure that out if you have a good meeting. Like if you have a meeting and they're just obviously tire kickers, or it just wasn't a good fit, or it was a terrible meeting, then you should close it out. And the SLA should be able to encourage them to close that out. So we know that, no, this is not going any further. Or if it's okay, we're interested, but we need to learn a bit more, still maybe add the stage there they can move them into, close the meeting, they go into opportunity stage as opposed from meeting to opportunity, but then they go into pipeline stage. So being able to have a mechanism so you can still understand the progression. So you don't just look at all of these people in meeting stage and not know the distinction between was that a good meeting? Are they moving forward? Or was it a bad meeting and is this being closed out? So making sure your SLA encourages kind of pretty binary behavior of are they moving forward or are they not? And it doesn't have to be such a big jump. It doesn't have to be they have to be moving forward to pipeline. Was it even just a good conversation? Basically, are you closing them out or are you not? It's maybe a better way of framing that.
I'm just going to say really quick, this handoff is also really tricky, and you need to make sure that you're communicating it effectively with your marketing stakeholders, with your finance stakeholders, with your executive teams, because traditionally people are measuring and they're saying, this is how many opportunities we're creating each quarter. Look at all the pipeline that we're generating, and we're mixing a object and a table in a database with the name of opportunity with the business context of a pipeline opportunity. So making sure that everybody's super clear on what does that truly mean is going to go a long way. I have been in scenarios where I've had to roll back a 0% opportunity because it was being misidentified, right? And it was causing a lot of friction between the teams. And so then we introduced a more complex process that was more difficult to manage and had less visibility, and then created its own set of problems. So just kind of assess, is there a communication and enablement gap, or is there a process improvement needed?
Yeah, one thing kind of related to that, I think, is we've talked a lot about kind of SLAs trying to drive the right kind of behavior from sales to be able to engage prospects the right way. But we touched on it a bit, but I want to really underscore that a lot of this also is just getting people to just do the CRM updates the right way, right? So you have the SLA, so people, maybe they're doing the right thing with having the meetings, having the calls, whatever. But if they're not updating Salesforce the right way and no one else getting visibility. And so that's still an SLA failure, right? So that's why it's trying to drive the right behavior, both for your buyer experience and the right behavior for your CRM updates. So I just want to make sure that there's two things there to really consider when you're thinking about what SLA is and how to track them.
Yeah, totally. We talked a little bit about opportunities and pipelines. So I'm going to take the last one myself, but I would say that once you do have an opportunity in pipeline, I think you guys talked about like really being mindful about like what a stage actually means. I agree with trying to figure out like what truly is pipeline and has the ability to close versus maybe some of your introductory stages, like a stage 0 for a meeting and a stage 1 was just more discovery, and how you want to track different SLAs for that, but also how you want to disposition them, I think can be useful. So sometimes instead of just a closed loss stage, I like kind of like a closed stage that's like no decision or closed, pre-pipeline or something. So you can actually differentiate like a better closed loss conversion rate, like what actually went into closed loss. But then also you're going to have a higher standard for when something should move through the funnel to each stage or how long it's just sitting in pipeline for. And that's where we see a lot of the issues in the CRM. Like we'll see opportunities that have been sitting there for 365 days or longer. And really like that should have been closed out. And a good reason why it should be closed out is like that can go back into the life cycle. Marketing can nurture it a bit more. And a lot of the times marketing will shy away from even doing any marketing to opportunities. But also, like Xander, you said, you're painting the wrong picture to the business of what actually is in pipeline. And that can mean, not hitting your goals. It can look, and then it's going to make you think, oh, we need 4x pipeline, 5x pipeline, because none of this is converting, but it's likely it just is a sanity issue. So I think tracking length and stage is a really important one there, and trying to make sure that's, proportionate to your average sales cycle. This is where a lot of sales operations focus, is sales enablement, like with their sales leader. And there's a lot of tools to help manage that. But yeah, any last before we go into kind of what the listeners should do now, any final thoughts on kind of anything else that architects can do to kind of help with SLA attainment or tracking?
We alluded to it, I think, Charlie, you did, but attainment is something that you need to be able to measure, and it's not just a notification. So oftentimes when I think about SLAs, people will say, well, I have Slack notifications that go out, and I have a report that goes out in what is currently there. But as you're architecting this solution, I definitely recommend having for each of your SLAs a status field of some sort that you can indicate like it's within SLA or it's outside of SLA. And then you can measure that over time. And you can do month over month and quarter over quarter reporting. So don't leave it at just notifications in real time. Make sure that you're building yourself something that you can report on later.
The one thing I'd add to that is date times. So we see a lot of clients, they might have date stamps, but not date times. And that makes things difficult when your SLA is more nuanced than just in days.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's end with like, where do people start? Because I know we talked about a lot there and a lot of things that you can do. But Xander, where do you think that listeners should at least start when they're trying to actually set SLAs properly with the goal to improve their funnel velocity?
First things first, identify what SLAs currently exist, what's currently being measured to. After you get an idea of that, maybe you find that you have an incredibly robust SLA process, or maybe you find that you're lacking one of those. It's a great idea to always go into looking at your data in the current state. Take a look at, what is your current sales ready to sales accepted averages across the business. Take a look at how long are meetings being stuck in that stage. How many 0% opportunities do you have? How many opportunities are sitting in the stage for more than 180 days? How many are more than a year, as you had mentioned, Chrissy? So just getting a baseline of your data is going to help you have conversations, because you're going to have to go outside of your team. And anytime that you're going outside of your team, you can't go there with a hunch. You can't just say, I listened to a podcast and they said do SLAs. You have to bring data to indicate why you might want to introduce SLA management within the team. So partner and align with your SDR leaders, with your sales leaders, and with your marketing leaders, and really get agreement across the team on what your SLAs should be. Make sure that it's not something that's just being forced down upon the team. It's something that you're building up together and getting agreement, because you're going to have to enforce it as a collective team. So start very, very simple. We talked about like number of touches and we talked about a multitude of metrics, but I would say start with how long did it take you to get that first touch? And then how long did it take you to get out of your stages? So that kind of disposition time. And then monitor that over time and start to optimize. And you can introduce additional levers as you go.
All right. Well, this is, like you said, it's a team sport. So yes, we want to hold people accountable and we want to track these things, but really it can start conversations around the whole team can rally around these to try and improve. And that's when everyone wins, right? So great episode. Thanks everyone for listening today. If you do have a question that you want us to tackle in a future episode, please send it. You can even send a video if you want to rga@cs2marketing.com. We can share your name or we can keep it anonymous if you prefer that as well. And we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Leave us a review, keep listening, share it with a friend. We'll see you next time.